This short video will give you some information about your Seca results, which by this point you should have had them emailed to you. And since we didn't go over them individually with each client, this is a quick little explanation as to how to interpret your results and what you're looking at. So you'll just follow along on the screen, and if you have a copy of your results, it would be super helpful to have those handy as we go through, and we'll talk about what the different categories are. So this is a scan that has been de-identified, so this is not actual patient data, so I'll just say that from a privacy standpoint. So we'll just move through. So the very first category that is on your report is body mass index, or BMI, which is a normal indicator. If you go to the doctor every year for your physical, this is typically something that gets calculated. It's not an ideal indicator of health because all it does is take your weight and height and divide them and give you a number. And so you can see on the chart below the way that the report will classify it. It will go in categories and it will change colors. Like yours, if it's in the normal range, will be in green. The example that we're looking at is in red because this patient was considered in the obese class. Unfortunately, the BMI does not take into account skeletal muscle mass, so sometimes even professional athletes can actually be considered obese or overweight by BMI only because of the fact that it does not include muscle mass. And so it's captured here, but we're going to keep moving through the report, and I'll show you some other areas that are even more important than BMI. The next chart on your handout is fat mass and fat-free mass. So you'll notice there's a number in parentheses, and then there's what that equates to in pounds. So we'll start with the left here with fat mass. So that for this client, there's 68.54 pounds of fat in the body, and that equates to 33.1%. That is body fat percentage, which if you're trying to get leaner, or you're in some sort of a fitness challenge, typically you want to know what your body fat percentage is, and that's the number that you want to look at on your report. Opposite of that is fat-free mass. In this example, it's 138.58 pounds, or 66.9%. That means everything else in the body besides fat. So for example, bones, muscles, tissue, water, organs, etc. So everything besides fat. And so that's the two categories there. Again, below that, you'll see charts that will classify by range and color, depending on if you're inside the normative range or out. Scrolling down, the next category is energy. And you'll see there are three categories. Resting energy expenditure is where we'll start. And this example, this client, their resting energy expenditure was 1,951 calories. So what that means is if this client literally laid in a bed for 24 hours and never lifted a finger, did nothing but sleep and breathe, their body would burn around 1,900 calories. The second line below that says physical activity level. If you remember when you got scanned, you had to select an activity level based on how you spend roughly 80 to 90% of your day. Was that mainly standing, walking, a mixture of that? In this example, the client selected a 1.6 activity level. So the number below that, under total energy expenditure, tells me that based on a typical day in terms of how active they are, their body is burning around 3,121 calories. That does not necessarily include what's burned through physical activity, but those two numbers are super important whenever we work to set macros for individuals because it helps us give a baseline. One important note for resting energy expenditure, and this is specifically true for females, if you eat consistently below that number, your body will not let go of fat, so your weight loss will stall. And it's a common problem we see with women who don't realize they're actually eating below their resting energy expenditure, and that's one of the reasons why that weight loss and fat loss can be challenging if you're not aware of that. The next category down is body composition chart. On the screen, it's a little bit difficult to see, but you have your results in front of you, and you'll notice there are 4 different quadrants. In the upper left-hand corner, it's increasing sarcopenic obesity. What that means is body fat percentage is going up, and at the same time, skeletal muscle mass is going down. So it's an inverse relationship. The bottom left quadrant is increasing thinness. We see people fall into that quadrant if they do a lot of chronic cardio, or people who are long distance runners like marathon runners. Increasing thinness means they are naturally lean, or they may appear lean, but they have very little skeletal muscle mass. The upper right quadrant is increasing obesity, which is pretty straightforward. And then the bottom right quadrant is increasing muscle mass. So you'll notice in this example, you'll see there the 3 rings. The green ring is the 50th percentile. The ring beyond that is the 50 to 75th, and then the 75th and beyond is the outer ring. In this example, you see the little tiny black dot. That's the measure point. So if you're looking at your results, that's where you scored. Ideally, if we're in a strength building program, we want to be moving toward that increasing muscle mass quadrant, because that means that we are building skeletal muscle mass, which is important. Moving on to the second page, the top chart is skeletal muscle mass. You'll notice that this is the normative value in this example of a patient who is, or a client, I use those words interchangeably, that's 5'7" and is a male, and you can notice that for this client, the average range of skeletal muscle mass is somewhere between 49 pounds and 73 pounds. This client has 68.8 pounds of skeletal muscle mass in their body. Then the smaller charts beside that on the right break down how that skeletal muscle mass is distributed through the body. So how much is in the left arm versus the right arm, the torso, which does include the major muscles of abdominal muscles and also muscles of the back, and then left leg versus right leg. You'll notice typically your dominant arm is slightly bigger than your non-dominant, not always. If you've ever had any types of injuries, maybe if you've had a knee replacement, or pulled a muscle in like a calf muscle or something like that, you may see differences based upon that. But this is super helpful because we want to know how much skeletal muscle mass we have in the body. An interesting note: the more skeletal muscle mass we have in our bodies, the more calories we burn at a resting state. So that is important for us to think about as we're doing strength training. I'm actually going to scroll down and jump down to where it says, I'm going to skip the 2 charts that you can see at the top, and I'm going to jump down to fluid first. You'll see total body water, and then there's a number in parentheses. In this example, it's 49%. So that's a snapshot in time as of today, how hydrated that this client was. For a female to be fully hydrated, it's around 55%, and for males, it's 60%. You can see in this example, this client was at 49% hydrated. And then below that, it breaks that out between how much of that water is extracellular versus intracellular water. We do want more water inside the cells than outside the cells. Otherwise, we could have issues with fluid retention. Below that is visceral adipose tissue. You can see in this example, let me move my screen down just a tad here. In this example, this patient had 3.7 liters of fluid in that visceral adipose tissue area. This is commonly referred to as belly fat, for lack of a better word. This is why we measure your waist whenever you get scanned. The reason why this is important is as that number increases, you'll notice that anything over 37 inches is considered high risk, and that's because there's a direct correlation. As that number goes up, so does the risk of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, stroke, etc. I'm going to jump back up to these 2 charts that I missed. I'm going to start with the one that says phase angle. So phase angle is basically a measure, it measures the health of the cells in the body. Normal ranges can vary pretty widely with age and gender. If you think of it, one of the ways that we know if a cell is healthy or not is how thick the cell walls are, and that is one of the things that phase angle is measuring. So if you can see on this graph, there's a natural kind of gradient. As we get older, that number automatically starts to trend downward just simply because we have less healthy cells in the body. For this client in particular, their phase angle was a 5.9 and they were in the 54th percentile. There's a couple of things that can affect your phase angle, everything from emotional stress, insomnia, if you're having trouble sleeping, if you've got inadequate intake of vegetables, like nutrient-dense foods, not enough protein, if you consume too much sugar or processed foods, or even if you're on any type of drugs, whether recreational or pharmaceutical, that can also indicate a problem. So phase angle is basically a snapshot in layman's terms of how healthy that your cells are. And then the chart above that, the BIVA chart, basically what it does is it takes your phase angle and it graphs it against your current marker of hydration to basically tell us what proportion of water you have in the body. And so it's looking at those two things graphed together. So hopefully this explanation helps you understand your results a little bit better. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to answer anything that comes up and let us know how we can help. Thanks.